Yeah. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Just Two Dads with my co-host, Mr. Sean Francis. I am Brian Altunian. And today's episode, we get to bring back another one of our favorite guests. This time, it is just in front of the launch of her book, Everything No One Tells You About Parenting a Disabled Child. Very excited to have our guest, Kelley Coleman, on today. So hang loose for another episode of Just Two Dads. There we go. Hey, everybody. I don't know why. I think it was kind of loosey-goosey today. Did I get a little echo in there? You get a little echo there, yeah?
Sounds
you did
good
for a second there. You did the Lou Gehrig. I don't know what happened there.
Yeah. Hey, everyone. I am Brian Altunian along with Sean Francis. And we are in episode 160-something. And very excited. We started this about 3.5 years ago to meet, talk with, and shine a spotlight on some people who are doing amazing things for the special needs community. We have been honored and blessed to have some amazing guests and people who are doing really incredible things. One of the things I think that we find the most heartwarming is when people take their situation and turn it inside out and do something that benefits the entire community. And so today's guest is no exception. Before we get to her and have a conversation about the release of her book, we just want to thank everybody who is joining us on our Facebook Live right now. Leave some comments if you'd like. Want to say hello. If you're catching us after the fact on our YouTube channel, please subscribe and hit the like. And again, leave messages for us. You can email us at wearejusttwodads@gmail.com. If you're hearing us on WSTX AM radio down in the U.S. Virgin Islands or on Google podcast outlets, wherever, thank you for making us part of your listening day. I want to thank Sean Hall out in Hawaii, who kind of keeps us all together, does some really nice graphics. That graphic we had for you today, Kelley, was courtesy of Mr. Sean Hall. He's amazing. And as always, we thank Billy Footwear for just being a part of our family. Billy Footwear, 10% discount if you click on the link that's in our show notes. And Billy does adaptive footwear for everybody, by the way. Just anybody who has difficulty putting their shoes on, the basic putting their shoes on, whether you have a physical limitation because of a diagnosis or age or whatever. Sometimes I just don't want to. I just don't want to put my shoes on. So totally get it. Anyway,
they also look
Billy,
really cool. They're great.
They look really cool. They are
really. Yep.
They're really cool. Sean and I host a Sean hosts and I show up to a men's group every other week. We do a men's support group for dads of special needs kids. Gives us a chance to have a safe place. We call it The Den. Also in our show notes, there's a form there if you want to sign up and join us. No cost. It's free. It's a Zoom every 2 weeks, Sunday mornings. Just a good place to, have brotherhood and camaraderie. So join us if you can. And I think that kind of winds everything up so we can get rolling here. I love our guest, and she's incredibly busy. We were talking before we got on about how March is just an amazingly first of all, you're so busy that the month is going to be over before you know it, because you're just going to be going 100 miles an hour, and she doesn't sleep. And so before we get to, I'm just going to throw it over to Sean Francis, who's going to introduce Kelley and get right into our conversation today. And Sean, how are you feeling today? I know you also have rock star hours at your house.
Yes, I'm blessed and the product and recipient of what I think is, serendipitous existence. The fact that we've got Kelley on today. We talked about being a parent or caregiver equates minimal sleep. And the fact that we're also, Kelley is the first guest as a friend of the show who is making a third appearance here. I don't believe anybody else has done that. And, her first appearance, we talked about You Will Feel Better, her, Facebook page and everything, a little bit about her story. The second appearance that she made, we talked about the book. I had the distinct pleasure and honor of contributing to the book, and we talked about the idea of just.
I'm gonna move.
Oh, Oh, that's your alarm at home. There you go. That's what happens when you do a live show.
By the way, now that we know how to party here, that's for sure.
But her second appearance, we talked about the prospect of writing a book. How do you just, again, like you were saying, how do you take a challenge and turn it into an opportunity? How do you go about writing a book? And then the very topic of her book, everything you wanted, everything no one tells you about parenting a disabled child. There's people that are listening that are going to say, oh, I can relate to that because I've experienced it. There are those who are going to be new to a diagnosis and learn what Kelley wishes she knew when her child was diagnosed. And so today we're going to talk about the book itself. Welcome again to the show, along with the alarm in the background.
Thank you.
The alarming and wonderful Kelley Coleman.
Right. By the way, that is the best intro because I love being alarming. So there you go. Let me try one sec.
That is awesome.
Hopefully, by the way, the magic is happening and I'm going to cover up the chipped paint because, guys, you know what? No matter how many victories we have, there are alarms, there's chipped paint, there's lack of sleep. As Brian was mentioning, my book comes out March 12th. I am so thrilled. Pre-orders are doing well, and that's a huge thing for getting it into the hands of the parents who need it most. And as I'm so thrilled to be preparing for that, we also have our annual IEP meeting, our annual social services meeting, and everything else in life that just comes up. So with all of this, I was so thrilled to be sitting down with you guys. When you reached out to me to do this show, it felt like this amazing show of support and celebration. And so I've been thinking so much about this is cool. I wrote a book and the importance of us celebrating one another and how all too often we are so caught up in our own thing that celebrating ourselves isn't the first thing or maybe even the 26th thing on our radar. And now we have an airplane. Welcome to life.
That is
the
benefit of a live show.
It happens. And so I so appreciate that this felt like you guys were reaching out to have a moment to celebrate me and just thinking about all of us as caregivers and all the things that we do and are doing to celebrate one another. And that's not nothing. And some days the fact that everybody's wearing pants, celebrate that. And you know what? Did your neighbor get their kid to brush their teeth today? Because the tiny things can be celebrations. And so I just wanted to take this moment to celebrate you guys. 166 episodes, I think you said. That's a big deal. And just all of us taking a moment to, the IEPs and the renewal paperwork and all of that will still be there, but just taking this moment to celebrate not just ourselves, but one another, because without this community of people, I absolutely would still be on the floor of my kitchen eating Nutella out of the jar, maybe not.
That means
very sweet.
That means a lot, and that's the best way that I've ever had anyone tell me mission accomplished, because that is exactly what the intent was, especially because we're in the middle of International Women's Month. We're not in the middle of it, just kicked off. International Women's Day approaches on the 8th, and all these women are inspiring us who have written these great books. So let's jump right into yours in terms of content, because it's so perfect, because I don't know how many manuals are out there that tell someone everything you wish you knew when your child was diagnosed, essentially. And before we jump into the topics and the chapters and the items, I want to ask you kind of, how did you go about finding out which topics to cover? Because they're so vast.
These are so vast. And I think it's worth noting in the beginning, none of us even know what the categories are we're going to even have to learn about, because for almost everyone entering this space with their child, it is just all new and mysterious and like which way is up.
Well, and by the way, that's every parent of even neurotypical children. They don't have a there's no manual that exists that tells you what to expect, right? You're kind of going through it. If it's your first child, you're like, is this normal? I don't know what it is. What, you know what I mean? It's like people don't know. So I didn't mean to interrupt you, but yeah, you're right. I mean, and then add the diagnosis on top of that, and then you're like, whew, I don't even know how to navigate these waters.
No. Yeah. And of course, with us, we have 2 children. They're about a year and a half apart. And if you were to draw a picture of the stereotypical quote unquote easy baby, that was our first child. And clearly we had decided because we were amazing parents. So clearly we had parenting like figured out in the first year. We're like, we got this good. And then our second kid came along and we're like, oh, we know nothing. Right.
So your first child was the jab, and your second child was the uppercut that you didn't see coming.
Yes, absolutely.
Right.
And we're thrilled to be in the ring with them both. And in terms of like not knowing anything and where do you start? When I first sat down in a puddle of tears with a cup of overpriced coffee, like, and ended up writing what still remains as essentially the introduction for this book, I made a list of like, here's what I think the chapters will be. And it was, what you might expect with insurance, social services, future care plans, financial planning, IEPs. I ended up dividing it one chapter with IEPs, one with school, because it is so vast. Disability rights and advocacy, I felt strongly about. And then there were also chapters that weren't part of my initial sit down, but became so important to me when I was thinking about what has mattered to me and what people need to know most in this journey. And so chapters like what this looks like for you as a parent caregiver, and talking about mental health and siblings and community, talking about a whole chapter on inclusion in the community, because that does look different for our family than I ever envisioned.
Right.
And perhaps the most important chapter in the whole book, I didn't know was an essential part of it, and is now chapter 1 of getting comfortable with disability. We really do need to talk about all of the bias and the bad messaging and programming, and how that shows up for us, and how we can listen to and learn from and follow people with real life experience being disabled if we are not disabled for ourselves. Also, maybe we're disabled, but we don't share our child's disability. And the messiness of I am in one demographic, my child is in another, and just how do we lean into the fullness of his experience without erasing my own? It is messy, and I talked to disability rights leaders and experts who everyone acknowledged, like, yeah, it's messy and we need to talk about it. So to answer your question in a long-winded way, a lot of the nuts and bolts things, like, I knew nobody knows how to call their insurance company because it's awful and no one enjoys calling their insurance company. And like, here's a better way to do it. Here's a better way to go into your specialist appointments and figure out how to work with the nurses, like all of that. But then the evolution of talking to other caregivers, talking to individuals with disabilities, especially those who are really working at high levels in the advocacy space, and the privilege of others being willing to have these conversations, made it so essential to have these chapters.
Good. I'm going to play greedy host and ask, like we always talk about, Brian and I will say that we're audience members as well as hosts, which is the reason why the show was created to begin with. So maybe not from an expert standpoint, but maybe, able to answer just from where your experience has been, even though your child is, younger than mine. So my son is 17. We're going through conservatorship, which is been a tremendous learning experience. But with regard to sleep or lack thereof, we have gone through the whole just not going to bed till wacky hours, whatever have you, because the lack of melatonin keeps him awake. What we're dealing with now is trying to cut it off by a certain time. And what's taking place is, from a behavioral standpoint, he has to go through the house and tinker and clean and do things before he gets in the bed. He has to do the same thing in the morning. So when we leave here is later than we should and all that kind of stuff. If there's anything that you've experienced as far as solutions with regard to that, or anything that's in the book, what might you be able to add in that regard?
That's a good question.
Sleep is tough. And were you saying something, Brian?
No, I just said it's a good question. It's one of those that, I was nodding off, but no, it's good. Sorry,
excellent.
Go ahead.
So you just always look like you're about to say something brilliant, and we don't want to miss out.
I am. No, I am. I'm always, It's always brilliant, by the way, just so you know, everything. But
excellent.
That's his nickname. Always brilliant. Always brilliant. There's Brian, always brilliant Altunian. Yes.
I'm alarming. He's always brilliant. And Sean, by the end of this conversation, we will know yours as well.
absolutely.
The sleep thing is so real, and it is so individual. And wouldn't it be nice if there was an easy solution? And I remember, even when Aaron was a baby and had his days and nights flipped and reading these books, and I'm like, yeah, that's great, but that doesn't actually apply to us. To the extent that you are able, and I'm sure you personally are already doing this, so I'll share for listeners, is anytime you can connect with others whose kids have the same diagnosis as yours is often the best place, because the real life experience is going to likely get you into a better place. And looking at what your kid needs in terms of the routines, I know a number of people whose kids have genetic syndromes where sleep disturbance and sleep disorders are very much a part of their syndrome. And for some people, medication, obviously well supervised by doctors, is the right choice. And for others, it's really figuring out how to tune into your kid. And is the routine the thing that keeps him the best on track? Or are you falling into a tough trap where you're like, this routine is not sustainable? And for me, I feel like the word sustainable is so often left out of the conversation. It's like people who are going to go on this diet program, and then as soon as they're off, they lose all this weight. And then as soon as they're off, they put it all back on, because that wacko diet is not sustainable. So I think for you, I think first start wrapping your head around, what routines help, what are all the brainstorm things, and what can we do that is sustainable over time? Because for most of us, the caregiving job, and it's a job, is a forever thing. So we need to really be thinking about, how is this sustainable for me over time?
Yeah, I appreciate that. That's so valuable, because it's an honest answer. And again, this is why as citizens, as inhabitants of this planet, we need each other. You had me thinking about something that I didn't even realize. So first of all, I'm so used to being the guy that raises his hand in the room when someone says, does anybody know a so-and-so, right? In terms of referrals, solutions, whatever have you, that it kind of threw me sideways when my wife said the other day, well, we need help, because obviously what we're doing, isn't working. And what I didn't realize is that, until this very moment listening to you, is that we've made some progress considerably, because what would take place is, not having a sleep issue once meant he didn't go to bed till 3 or 4 or 5 or something like that. And it's not like that doesn't happen. What's happening now, and maybe people that are listening can relate to this, is that we have a set time for him to get to bed. And if that doesn't take place, he doesn't get to run some of the errands that he wants to do. Right. And then, that doesn't necessarily seem to be working. So then you start to question. I remember my wife was telling me, well, it's behavioral. It's not all his fault. So then you're trying to disseminate that which is a stubborn kid versus a diagnosis and a behavior and something that he can't help. So there's two things I took away from what you said, which is you keep trying to figure, one, we've made progress, right?
Mhm.
Two, you keep trying to figure it out. And then I personally believe that we have a responsibility. Service to others is the rent we pay for our room on earth. So as we make the progress, let people know, whether I share it here or on my own social media. And the same goes for anybody that's listening. Whatever solutions you have that works for you, make sure you share it and state that, again, as you mentioned too, this is what worked for me. Don't know if this will work for you, because again, it's so individualized. I love that. Thank you.
Mhm. And also, and this is very individualized, it is possible in some circumstances, certainly not all. We can't ever make generalizations, but there might be social service support when sleep is not happening for you and your family, through Regional Center in California, through your social service agency if you're outside of California, and asking for those respite hours. Um, if you have those hours, if you are able to find someone, it's weird having somebody in your house at night. We've done that because we were desperate and it was the right thing to do. For our child, it didn't really make a difference whether it was me up with him or a night nurse up with him. I'm now usually the one who is up with him. Again, it depends on your child, but a child might say, whoa, I don't like having this person here. And the way to get this person not here is I just have to sleep. Okay, I'm going to go lay in bed. Bye.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's an interesting approach.
Don't know if that is appropriate for your child. It is not appropriate for all children. It could be scary or disturbing or overwhelming for some kids. So I never take it lightly adding a person into the mix, especially at nighttime, but in the spirit of considering all options. And I love your sentiment of sharing. I think that's, when people say like, oh, was it hard for you to write this book? Writing wasn't hard because the enormous degree to which I share our information and the templates I've created, and it really felt like an extension of my passion for keeping other people from reinventing these same wheels. So I love that you're like, I will figure this out and I will tell everyone. And you know what? Somebody's going to be able to sleep because of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Excellent. Yeah. That's
that's
everything. Go ahead, Brian.
My question in all that, Sean, is the issue, because Elijah's almost 18 years old now, right?
Mm-hmm.
So is the issue that you guys aren't getting the sleep, or is it an issue for him? And again, I sort of think about as our kids get older.
Both, and that's a great question, because for some people the answer may differ. For us, it's both, because he hasn't. We haven't had an issue with elopement in years, but once is all it takes. You don't ever forget it. So your thought, because so what happens is there's two things. I'll say, well, I am not about to lose sleep over this. He's good if he wants to stay up. I've tried whatever. I need to get sleep. I need to put my mask on first, my oxygen mask on first. And so I go to sleep, but then you don't stay asleep because you either sleep lightly or you wake up because, okay, is he going to go out the door? I kind of don't know. And then the other thing is, routines are important. So no matter what time it is, he needs to come wake you up to tell you. And it makes it difficult to stay angry too, because he'll want to go through, tell you what we're going to do on this day, what we're going to do on that day, what we're going to do on that day. But then he also wants to give you a hug, tell you good night, sweet dreams, and then tell you that he loves you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So then you're like, I can't get mad. I'm like, ah. Yeah. So, and again, if you compare it to other people's problems, it's a good one to have. It's a good one compared to the one we had before, where he was just up till maybe like 5 or 6 or something. I mean, we had one day last week where he went to bed at 7, but it was a Saturday night.
Yeah.
So it varies, but there's so much power in your asking that question too, which we forget, raising the consciousness and stepping outside. Does it really matter? Will it matter in a week, 2-3 months, a year from now? And those things are always worth asking too.
Yeah, I remember having conversation with our, doctor when, our kids were younger, and that idea of sleep. And I think even for us as adults, we'll go through periods of times we have high stress or whatever, and we don't sleep well. And then we have one night where our body just like makes us sleep because it's making up for the time. And so, your body tends to adjust to those kinds of things. My almost 17-year-old now, on the weekends, he's up till 2, 3, 4 in the morning and, gets rolling, at 8 wakes up at 8 after 3 or 4 hours of sleep. And I'm like, I can't do that. I don't know how the heck you do it. And then he gets his sleep. You know what I mean? It's sort of, he makes up for it. Like for him, that's a price. So
Yeah.
I don't have the issue of elopement. So that's a real,
Right.
I understand that that's a concern, but for me, I'm like, I can't stay up. So I'm going to go to sleep and,
there's that.
I'm never concerned
And
about
then,
him.
yeah, there's that. And then just like I said, with any parent, regardless of diagnosis or lack thereof, your biggest challenge is always trying to strike a balance between teaching your child to fish versus giving them fish. And then when it comes to a diagnosis, that dance is 50 times more precarious, because if we're not careful, we can just be like, his whole life is one of accommodations. And there's cases where those things need to be made, need to be met. But at the same time, Brian, in our work in financial services, we prepare people for a time when we exist only in memory, whether you're talking about life insurance, the estate planning, all those kind of things. But there's a preparation for that doesn't have anything to do with the financial instrument, which is making that child or loved one as independent and as whole as they can be on their own. And there's certain things where we catch ourselves that we're like, wait a minute, we've been doing this for him for years.
Yes.
That can't take place anymore. And so we're retraining ourselves and training him, and having to be, when I say having to be patient, that applies more so to me than Laura, and understand, well, you've led him down this road for all this time. If he's not going down the road too willingly, you got to cut him some slack, because all of a sudden you're changing up the direction. So those are some of the things that we're dealing with too.
I love that you brought up the independence piece and how often parents, and I'm including myself in this group, fall into the trap of doing all the things. For my typical kid, it was very easy to just be like, I'm going to pack your lunch, I'm going to help you get dressed, all the things, send you off to kindergarten, whatever. And then he grew into his own independence, and that happened so organically.
Right.
For Aaron, our younger son, who does have multiple disabilities, I was thinking about this exact same thing as I was helping him get dressed, and just trying to do it quickly and saying, like, actually, if we can start this sooner, we don't have to do it quickly to get out the door, because I don't want to be putting on all of your clothes for you in 20 years from now.
Exactly.
For kids who are going to grow up to become adults, because that's what happens, we need to think about 20 years from now, because it might take 20 years, literally, to teach him to fully dress himself.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a long time. That can be a daunting time frame. But you know what? I'm not working on 2044, which sounds like robot butlers and like Jetsons World to me, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's around the corner, though.
Wear spacesuits and eat like little pods of food. It's gonna be super weird.
Yeah.
But we'll have real good internet connection and no alarm in the background.
Right.
It'll just be in our
And we'll have a robot that wakes us up.
Oh my gosh, yes. And puts us to bed in Sean's case.
Yeah.
So what are these things that I can do today that is going to, that the things that will build towards that is something we've been talking about so much. And in the book, and so many of the disabled advocates I spoke with kept reiterating, like, how can we build independence and autonomy and teach our kids to advocate for themselves, and that we will listen. And I think it's so easy, and especially my kids are 10 and 12, so they are still children. It's easy for me to just do the things, but instead to hold up 2 shirts and say, which shirt do you want today?
That's exactly, you're in my mind, because that's what we do, is you ask him, what do you want to wear? And you know, it just hit me as we're having this conversation. your child's independence or lack thereof is a great barometer of the amount of self-care that you give yourself.
Oh,
your child's independence is a level of self-care, because check this out. Elijah dresses himself, right? He doesn't know how to tie a tie just yet. And I said that because he wears a tie on Fridays. Those that know me well know that he wears a suit on Fridays. He looks like he's employed by the Men in Black. And he'll ask for two things when he gets dressed. Help me, tie my tie. Or he's very specific. He'll say, tie my blue tie, tie my black shoes. He doesn't know how to tie his shoes. And you know whose fault that is not? His. And when you talk about the self-care, because for your own preservation, actually enabling your child is a form of temporary self-care too. Because if you're like, wait a minute, if I could just put your shoes on and we're good to go, that takes me less time. I can get some peace of mind and I go about my way. That's an investment with a short return. The investment that is equivalent to the long game is taking the time to teach him how to tie the shoes. And we just, so if anybody's listening, don't beat yourself up, because my wife got a book on how to tie shoes, right? Which you would get for a younger child. And he got it when he was young. It's a good book. Sit and read it with him. How often have we sat there and been like, okay, wait a minute, you're going to tie them. And there's times where I catch myself, you know what? You got to learn how to tie the shoes. I got to teach you. And then when I get ready to try and teach him, because everything else has taken a long time, like, we got to get out the door.
Yeah.
So you just have to make the choices. Yeah.
By the way, someone just taught me we've all been tying shoes wrong, and there is a faster and easier way to do it that works better. I'll send you the video, but basically,
please do.
Here's the shoe.
So it's not the bunny ears.
No, you make a loop and you make a loop, and then you just knot those together. If you want to double knot them, you can, and your shoe's tied. That's it. Just make the loops. You can tuck them into the side of your shoe if you want. Wow. And my 12-year-old has been experimenting with this. So I was like, hey, somebody sent me this video. What do you think? And he had a friend over, and they were both giggling. They are very physically capable 12-year-old dudes.
Yeah.
Giggling with joy over, oh my gosh, you just saved us so much time leaving PE class.
That's fantastic. Do you know what? If I searched for it is it on YouTube? What would I look under?
She'll send it to you.
I'll send it
to us, and then we'll put it in the show notes too.
I'm going to share it right away. Yeah.
No one tells you about parenting. Period. There's a better way to tie shoes, and we've all been doing it wrong. Every one of us.
I hate to say the obvious thing here, but there's a company that sponsors our show called Billy Footwear that has dress shoes that are easy for people who don't tie their shoes.
I was actually thinking of them.
When you talk about raising your consciousness, Einstein's saying, right? You can't solve a problem at the same level of consciousness that it occurs. Look, it's a good thing that you don't pay for real estate under your nose, because there's so many things that are right there. You have any idea how expensive that would be?
Yes. And also, I think because you brought up Billy's and because I'm a fan, looking at ways that we can empower our kids and looking at clothes, looking at their choice of shoes. Shoes are a big thing in our house because of how our son gets up and down and his levels of mobility. We just tear through shoes all the time. And not only like, oh, we need things that are supportive and accessible and all of that, but I actually think it does matter that he doesn't just look like his clothes are additional medical equipment. Like, he's already got medical equipment. And thinking about small things like what shirt your kid is wearing today, what color of shoes they are choosing, it gives them the gift of autonomy and independence. And if you need more accessible shoes, saying like, cool, like, it doesn't have to be some orthopedic equipment thing. And for us, even the adaptive bed that we have, I really enjoy that it doesn't look like medical equipment. By the way, we are not afraid of medical equipment. We got lots of that in our house and in our lives. But the fact that other kids come over and they're like, whoa, cool tents. Are you guys camping in here? We still have all the disability related equipment, but as right now, our son's like, I don't care. I just want to go watch airplanes and hang with the dog. But
Yeah.
what are the things we are building in now that are empowering and enabling to him that come with his disability that make him feel like, oh, this is cool. I have striped shoes, or I have a bed that looks like a really cool tent, of just day-to-day life things. Like, how can we enable our kids?
Yeah.
With any kid, disabled or not, I feel like the goal is enabling the child to have maximum independence and to live the fullest version and expression of who they are, not who I want them to be, but who they are. And we think about that so consciously a lot of times with our disabled kids
Right.
that we can forget that that's actually what we're doing with any kid. It is just a
Right.
different set of rules and constraints depending on your kid.
You know what's so weird,
Everything.
Brian? I don't think I've ever told you this, but I have to ask my mom about this because it's in my memory. It was a short period of my life, and nobody talks about it, probably because it was that far. It was that short a period of time. At least I think it was short. But I wore braces as a kid, like the Forrest Gump braces for the legs, right? Which is as old school as it gets. So it's like these Buster Brown looking shoes. Now I say Buster Brown, people are like, who's that? Right?
I'm there with you.
Right. With the braces up the side of the leg because I was severely pigeon-toed. Right. And so people, they stare as you walk and all of that kind of stuff. So, and I remember our good friend Ed Milet in one of his most recent episodes of his podcast was saying that no matter where you are in life, no matter what you're doing, whether you're on the precipice of success, you're in the abyss of failure or whatever, everything that you've done in your life up to this moment has prepared you for this moment. So when I think about it, if I look at it with sight, I can think my child was born with a quote unquote disability and diagnosis. I'm passionate about it. So is yours, Brian, and here we are. But I was kind of prepared for this before he was born without even, kind of realizing that. That's just kind of it's weird how we end up where we are.
Yeah. Well, I have one to go along with that. In high school, I had to wear a Milwaukee back brace because I had scoliosis. I had 2 years, 23 hours a day wearing a full-on back brace.
I didn't know that.
Actually, yeah, and it actually helped to form what's become my, I tell jokes. I have a lightheartedness about me. I did stand-up comedy for a few years. That was partially my defense mechanism. When I was in high school, for crying out loud, wearing this brace, and so, I had to sort of make light of the situation, what was, kind of a horrible situation. I had glasses and braces at the same time as well. So yeah, it's prepped me for where we are today in a lot of,
it sure
has
things.
Yeah, and
how going back to the go ahead. I'm sorry, Kelley.
I was just gonna say, and how great if we are looking at, and certainly physical things like that are easy to remind ourselves of with our kids and checking in with them. And how are you feeling about this? Does anybody at school ever notice your back brace? Do they ever say anything? What's your response? How do you feel? Because I think acknowledging and validating whatever the kid is feeling, and don't say, oh, don't feel bad if they make fun of you. Oh, don't feel that way. Buck up. Like, no, just validate. Like, oh, tell me more. Tell me what that's like for you. Can we brainstorm some quippy, hilarious responses? And I think so many kids with disabilities really do need to have the conversation of, you know what? People might notice. In my case, my son's disability is visible. You can tell by seeing him, like he's got something going on. And so we absolutely talk about with him and with his brother all the potential reactions and scenarios, and people tend to be great. But preparing our kids for how the world might interact with them, positive and negative, I think is really empowering.
Yeah, for sure. We just had this conversation with Greg Greg Grumberg, who I know you were on his Talk About It podcast as well. Who his son has epilepsy and has seizures, and so obviously that's a very noticeable physical experience when you are in the
when it
presence
presents.
of it.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting because we remember our children have internalize how they respond when that happens in front of other folks, and then how we as parents respond too. He asked us specifically, how would you react? Like there's a coach or a volunteer dad that of a baseball team who had sort of called out his son after he's had a small episode, and said Greg, said took everything within him to not overreact, do something a little bit more physical. But it's interesting because again, it goes back to how and now that I think about it, for my children, my son has Crohn's, and it presents sometimes in his skin, as response to the medication, and so he's self-conscious about it. And so I asked him, how are you dealing with it, and I can ask that question with true empathy because I went through something physical, right? I went through that at that age. And so I can empathize with him and also be an empathetic ear and help him, navigate those waters. All that to say that I think, again, all of us have things that we have to deal with and resolve and solve in our social settings and it comes from where, what we dealt with when we were at those ages as well. And so, again, lessons that we share with others are valuable to give perspective, I think.
Yeah. Kelley, let me ask you, we always talk about, it goes by so fast, but it seems faster today. So I'm going to read off some of the topics. All right. So the chapters include, everything no one tells you about getting comfortable with the disability, as you mentioned, the diagnosis itself, working with your medical team. And I think it's important for people in life, generally speaking, to make sure that they have a team. For instance, a financial coach or advisor. People think that that's something for a wealthy person. An estate plan, that's something for a wealthy person. If your dollars, your plans for your dollars are worth as much as anybody that's wealthy. So you've got all these topics here, therapies, school, disability, advocacy. Do you feel like there's any topic that you didn't tackle in the book?
There are so many topics I wanted to tackle, and a number of them, right? I mean, this could be. Did you ever have like the old set of encyclopedias? We sure did. I'm like, this could be the new Britannica. There is so much that is necessary to tackle, and I'm figuring out what the next book will be. I would love to source experts besides myself and just facilitate the conversation in a chapter or a whole book on how race, religion, culture, gender identity, all of that factors into that piece, the demographic piece, plus the disability piece, and your interactions with the world in terms of getting services, how your culture navigates all of this. The disparity statistics are so upsetting. And digging into all of that, I feel like I would love to facilitate a conversation amongst people who are genuine experts in this. The sibling piece I touch upon, and one of my experts in the book is a sibling and has dedicated his life's work to sibling supports. The sibling piece and the family dynamic, and certainly dynamics within marriages, within divorce, within dating, as an adult with a kid who has significant support needs, is a different picture. And talking to friends who are in that world right now, that makes a difference. Certainly the transition to adulthood, I'm considering that being its own next book, because the conservatorship, where they will live, who their advisors and friends, and what it will look like when they're not going to school every day.
Yeah.
All of those things. I mean, this is. I'm just gonna close that door because the dog opened it. And it's noisy. Awesome. You know what, guys? We just keep rolling. We just keep
Yeah.
rolling.
That we
So-
do.
So I mean, there are so many things within the bucket that I feel like this book really serves, which is caregiving is a job. For
Mhm.
many of us, it is a full-time and forever job for which there is no training. And you are
That's right.
more often than not thrown into it from a place of ignorance and inadequacy, and like I don't even know the questions to ask.
Yeah.
And the gaps in access to information based on demographics, again, it is so upsetting. And I really felt most passionately, and how I whittled this down into just one book for now is, what are the basics that we need for the on the job training of how to be a caregiver, so that this can be sustainable over our lifetime. And like you said, planning for when you are
beyond.
not here, planning for my lifetime and beyond. My son has an undiagnosed genetic syndrome. We don't know if his particular disability impacts his life expectancy. So we need to move through life imagining he will live a long and happy and healthy life where he will need intensive levels of support round the clock forever for the rest of his life. And we need to have these conversations now. There is a chapter, and I know, Sean, you contributed to it, about financial planning and future care plans. And my kid's 10, but you're right. We do need, at the bare minimum, to have a will in place and build from there, and to really have these conversations in a way that we can understand and use and feel empowered. I've certainly talked to plenty of amazing and well-versed professionals that I just like go home and cry because I'm like, I don't know what that conversation was. What going on? And then I have a conversation with a friend who explains what just happened. And I'm like, oh, okay, cool. I got this.
Right.
And so it's really, I'm writing from a place of what is the job training the caregivers need in a way that feels comfortable and understandable and usable and empowering, so that we can make this life sustainable.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
For sure. There are so many topics around, around those kinds of things. Even things like diet, nutrition, the impact of things that we consume on our bodies. There's a whole nother book right there. There are a lot of things. How does the body work? What makes it work? I think it's interesting. When we talk to folks who have children have a rare genetic disease or some other disability that's falls a little outside the mean, the standard mean. How does the body work? How does that happen? How does that function? The epilepsy is fascinating to me. There are others. We've had people on the podcast that had children with what was that thing, Sean? It was tubular
Sclerosis?
Oh my gosh.
yeah.
Was it?
Tubular
Tubular
what's it called?
sclerosis. You can call it TS. Now that we've said
Yes.
the word, you can just call it TS, and it's much easier to pronounce.
Yeah,
Right.
It's fascinating and really not a massive deviation from our standard DNA. Like it's I just find that
Just
the
a little-
subject matter of the things how amazing our bodies are,
Mhm.
and just internally and how they work, and is there something that we can do, in even a minor way to make an adjustment so that some things improve. There's always been this talk
Well-
about CBD with autism and things like that, right? That
Right,
help
right.
in certain areas.
Well, we're keeping it in that thought. We talked about it on the show somewhat, and I've been curious because when you're a parent, you do what you do. Your children make you so very weak yet so very strong. You take a bullet for them 5 times over, and God forbid, and have mercy upon the soul, of anyone who tries to harm your child, regardless, just as a parent. But I stopped to think, because you just do what you do, I started wondering over the last couple of months, like, I wonder how being a caregiver statistically affects one's life expectancy, right? And so I Googled that, and I saw stories about studies from well-credentialed entities that said that being a caregiver, and over time, we realize being a caregiver is a broad definition. You may be caring for an elderly parent, someone that's injured. It could be temporary or permanent. We always say you're going to be a member of this community as long as you're blessed with long life, right? Even if it's just age itself. But one study from a well-credentialed entity said that as a caregiver, one's life expectancy is 10 years less. In the same search that I did in Google, I only looked at two. The one that came up right underneath it was another well-credentialed entity that said that one's life expectancy would be increased by being a caregiver. So just like everything else is personalized, if you think about it, if you have just as we know that being a caregiver, our divorce rate is higher. And then I would imagine that for those of us who have been blessed with a strong union and are still married through the caregiving process, it's probably been strengthened just as much as it's been challenged or weakened by the caregiving experience. So I think that's why we start the show. This is your third visit with us, so we didn't do it this time, but this is why we start with a person's origin and what's your story? Where do your superpowers come from? Because who you are dictates everything about how you respond to the diagnosis. And so depending on those things, you could see where being a caregiver might, give one tremendous purpose. I know a family friend who had a daughter who had a brain injury due to a surgical procedure that did not go well. And the daughter passed away as an adult. I would venture to say that she probably struggles now with more purpose now that the daughter has passed than she did as a single mom when she was alive. And so each situation is going to vary.
Yes. And I just wanted to highlight, as you were talking about the things you were finding online, you kept saying credentialed, legitimate sources, and just underlining, we can find anything we're looking for online. And
Exactly.
be sure we're paying attention to the sources and who are our trusted sources for these things. That I love that you brought that into the conversation, because that's important.
Yeah, my daughter, she's in college. She told me the other day about, and I need to make sure I share it. It was a source of authentication, I think, through Google or something like that lets you know like what you're looking for, because any bozo can say that there really are flying saucers that come down at noon every day, and they in fact are well credentialed, so therefore the information is accurate and true.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Well, we're at 52 minutes in. I just can't believe that. But here's the thing. The question always evolves, or the answer always evolves, right? So this is the fun part. I am always anxious to hear the answer. I'm really anxious to hear yours to the question, which is as follows at this portion of the show. Our ability to change ourselves is tied, great or small, to our willingness or ability. Our ability to change the world is tied to or affected by our willingness or ability to change ourselves. So with that said, give us one example of a thought or a belief that you once held dearly, but now no longer believe to be true.
This is, oh my gosh, as you're asking that, I'm starting to cry. I'm like, there's so much, by the way. Can we keep down for another hour? The first thing to come to mind is just that I knew anything about disability when I started this journey. And the ignorant thoughts that I had in my head about what disability actually was and would look like for my child, for my family, for my future, in school, all the things, it was all based on nothing. I was literally Googling, when I found out my baby was disabled, this will go with your Buster Brown reference. I was Googling Blair's cousin on the show Facts of Life, because I was like, wait, there was a character on
I've been trying to get her on the show. Jewel, Her last name is Jewel. I forget her first name. Yes.
Oh my gosh, I feel badly. I'm blanking on her name. She's so great. She's a comedian.
Yes.
She's hilarious. And like what? And by the way, that was a great example of a disabled person playing a disabled person. Like I knew nothing.
Jerry Tyler is her name.
Thank you. And
yeah, the character was Jewel. Sorry.
Okay, yes. So for the longest time, I was afraid to talk to and connect with actual disabled people because I had it in my head. I am not ready to hear about how hard my kid's future and my family is going to be. Oh, this is going to be so horrible. And like, what? No, this was like this huge disservice I was doing to myself and especially to my kid by not being in community with people who are having this lived experience, who are firsthand a part of the disability community, just like my son is. And anytime you are getting information from people who are living that experience is always the right way to get that information. So always be willing to look at yourself and say, what am I just making up? And where can I get the real information? Because you know who's not awkward about talking about disability? People with disabilities. It is just part of life.
Right.
And I am just so honored that so many people have been open and willing to share their own stories with me and with my family, because nothing is more important than really owning the part of my son that is a part of his genetics, not going to change, and connecting him to a community where I can find the safe people for him to talk to, where he's not like scaring up some like randos on the internet. Right? But being in community with people who might not share his diagnosis, but might share his life experience in a way that I don't. And not only being okay with that, but being thrilled that he has that experience to share with someone.
Yeah.
Wow. Fantastic.
Amazing.
That's fantastic.
Kelley, thank you so much. We put a backup on the screen. It's everything no one tells you about parenting a disabled child. You can pre-order it now. We've got the links up in the show notes. Do yourselves a favor, get a copy of this book, share it with people that you know that have, by the way, they don't just have to be a parent of a child with special needs. It could be a family member who is observing and watching and you know, maybe they want to know how things work and they don't really understand, and their child is busy caregiving for their child, and so they don't have time to, you know, to get details. Give the book away to as many people as you can.
Yes, thank you. And to libraries and medical offices and hospitals and schools and social workers. We need this book to get to the people who can't afford to buy it.
Beautiful. Love it. And as we sign off again, I want to thank everybody who caught us live and on Facebook and on YouTube. Again, send us your comments, questions to wearejusttwodads@gmail.com. We actually do have a website that is about to launch. And so we are excited about that because we're going to have this book and some of the others that we've promoted on there as well. So you'll have access to that too. Thanks to Sean Hall in Hawaii for everything that you do to support us. And for those who are listening on WSTX AM radio and on Google outlets, podcast outlets, I should say, not Google. It's in my brain. Thanks for making this part of your listening day. And I always say, you know, at the end, empathy and love is always the most important things to think about. When you see somebody going through a situation, have some empathy. You don't know what they're dealing with in the moment. If you look at the world through the lenses of love, the world's just a better place. So with that, I'll throw it over to Sean. Kelley, thank you again for the amazing ride. You know, this hour just flew by. It does every time we talk to you. Thank you. Sean.
Kelley, thank you for being here as well. It's just always great to see you. Looking forward to the book launch event coming up. And thank you so much. You know, it's really a big deal to me that you thought enough to ask for my contribution for the book, and that's huge. And what it it's going to do long term and benefit both Brian and I and people that follow us is yet to come, because it's pushed, you know, the notion of putting something out there and you know, and writing a book and reminding everyone that you've got something to offer to people. Everybody has value and everybody has worth, right? And we always talk about, you know, be more childlike, less childish. Remember that everybody has value. Everybody wants to be seen, wants to be heard, but don't deny yourself the reward of seeing somebody else as well. So to each and everyone within the sound of our voice, thank you so much. We love you.
Love you. See you again next time.